Hello. So after my episode 1 video talking about dichotomy, and the justice and mercy dichotomy, and how that does tend to spill over into our understanding of salvation, our understanding of living the Christian life. There is a dichotomy when it comes to how we view and handle sin and accountability. Had some really good conversations with some of you. I'll point out one was my brother. maybe he'll watch this one too. Just want to continue some of those thoughts. There's some scripture that we do have to wrestle with a little bit when you talk about dichotomy, because again, the question is, well, justice, mercy, we're just going to stand in the middle. Kind of. One verse that a lot of people want to point to is in Revelation, and forgive me for not knowing the exact reference, but it's where God is speaking through John to the churches, and he's addressing the one church. I'm blanking on the name of it, but says, "You're neither hot nor cold, you're just lukewarm, and I will spew you out of my mouth." It's not a good thing. And so, if you hold a view of this dichotomy and this tension on different subjects within theology and practical Christian living, are you being lukewarm? I think that is a valid question to ask. I think specifically, contextually, that passage is about the passion that the church, that specific church, had for God. It wasn't red hot, and it wasn't cold either. It was just And by God saying, "You're lukewarm and I spew you out of my mouth," it's like, you can't be both. You're either one or the other. It's like, maybe it's a bad analogy, but can you be almost holy or almost pure? No, not really. It's either one or the other, right? If you have one impurity, one imperfection, then you're imperfect, you're impure, you're unholy, right? And so this false sense of middle ground that sometimes we do put on the Christian life and on our devotion to God. Well, I'll follow God today if I feel like it. Maybe that's the problem that God is addressing. If you are letting your feelings dictate how you behave towards God and towards others, then you've made your own feelings your God, in a sense, and you have left your first love, if you had the first love to begin with. Just some thoughts on that. Now, where that applies more to practical Christian living, and I'm going to bring the word politics into this also, because in politics we have these two terms, at least in American politics. We've got conservative and liberal. Now, a decade ago when I went to college, I think liberal meant something different maybe than it's applied for today. And the word progressive keeps getting intertwined with that liberal ideology. And ironically, there's also this libertarian that's kind of branched off of both of them. It's not really middle ground, because there's a lot of conservative elements to libertarianism. And ironically, if I just go ahead and say which one I identify the most with, I would probably be more libertarian in my political leanings, but I'm not registered that way. But that's how I tend to view things. And when you break, terms mean things, and doesn't mean they're always applied correctly. Because even liberation, comes from the Latin root to mean to free. And so, classical liberalism was about being free to think, being free to process, free to choose, free to explore. Okay. And, from that classic standpoint, I do think we do need to have in society freedom to explore, to invent, to create. I think that's a part of what it means to be human. And when that's the extreme end of the spectrum from extreme conservatism, where you do everything exactly by the book, you do exactly what tradition, dictates, and you don't change tradition, you don't try new ways. How dare you? If you do, we're going to excommunicate you. That's kind of where there's that opposite reaction. Like, are there better ways of doing things, of living life? Are there healthier ways? Now, it's always interesting, especially you pick any given subject. There's a huge movement right now within America. Some people call it being crunchy, where you are starting to make your own bread. You're growing your own food. You're making your own clothes. These people are very inspired by the Amish way of living. And if you can't tell by my neck beard here, or chin strap, there's elements of that I and my family adhere to and are exploring, and some of that's a reaction to the over-processed foods and the just wanting to detach from the economic structures we have and how unstable things are, and wanting to be a little bit more self-reliant. I'm getting down to the nitty-gritty practical, aren't I? But how we look at that, there's a temptation, especially in the crunchy community, to say, if you don't adhere to this, if you don't make your own bread, if you don't have your own chickens in the backyard, then you're wrong, and you're poisoning your children. Well, ironically, on the flip side of that, if you're more on the liberal progressive side, you're like, how dare you abandon modern food and modern medicine? And, we put antibiotics in meat to protect the meat so that it's safer to eat. And how dare you not vaccinate your children, and all this and this and this. And, and it's like, who's right? Are there elements of truth on both sides of the spectrum? Are those elements of truth worth holding on to on both sides of the spectrum? Is there strength in the tribalism that the conservatism tends to drive us towards? Or is there greater strength in the globalism that the liberal progressivism tends to strive for? I know those are very charged terms and can be applied differently, but currently I kind of walk the middle line. Now, does that make me hypocritical? To some people it does. On either extreme it does. Here I am. My t-shirt's American made. My boots were made in Bangladesh. My jeans, I think, were made in Vietnam. My socks were made in the U.S. My underwear is probably made in China. It might be TMI. So my wardrobe is globalistic. Ooh. Oh no, but yours probably is too. Does that mean you're not a patriot? Does that mean that you're unwise and hypocritical and you should buy American only? Might have to pretty soon with all these tariffs. That's a whole nother topic. That was a long, weird thread. Just some questions to ask and things to ponder. I don't know exactly where I was going with all of this, but it does have practical meaning in everyday life. You know, some of the decisions that I made 5-10 years ago about food, about purchasing, about where I would go, where I wouldn't go, things change over time. Is that wrong? No, I think that's good and I think that's healthy, but ultimately we have to be intentionally engaged with why we're doing what we're doing. And I think that's the danger on both ends of the spectrum, is when you don't. So when you're just on the conservative tribalistic side, you're following the orders of the elders, to a T, because that's the only way to survive. You're afraid to try new things. You're afraid to go against the grain. There's danger in that, because you become just an automaton, if that's the right word. You become just a pawn, even, of the tribalistic nature of your group. You're not thinking for yourself. You're not honoring the individualism that God created into you. Now, again, there's the opposite end of the spectrum here, and that is, if you're too individualistic, you march only to the beat of your own drum. And that even applies how you look ethically at the world. What's right for you is right for you and not for anybody else. That's very selfish. One side might be good for the group, the other side might be good only for you. What's weird about that is the conservatism and tribalism, you need to adhere to what we say for the betterment of the group. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got be yourself, be individualistic, live your own life, your own truth, and tolerate the truths of others. But that end tends to have the globalism. Can't we all just get along, right? That crazy bumper sticker of coexist, right? If only that were possible. Where do you stand and why? Or are you just getting pushed around? Going back to that whole lukewarm thing. If you just don't care, you haven't made any concrete choices to care, any convictions to actually stand on, I think that's where God has a problem. Bringing this back into more Christian discipleship, had a conversation with a young man the other day. He's a recent convert. I think it was 3 years ago. And there's some things in his life that I think are blatantly sinful. I say that in love. And I've addressed these things with him. But he's also in a situation in his life where moving away from those things would cause a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort in the short term. Now, those things are going to cause him more and more pain in the long term if they don't get out of his life. And that's where, as a Christian brother, I share those things with him. And he's making small steps. And it's cool to see God moving in his heart and his life to get him out of that situation. Talking with another Christian young man that kind of similar thing. And I know some people got really impatient with him and said, even someone, saying that it must not be a genuine convert if he's not going to walk away and change in their timing. And I understand that to some extent, but what I'm saying is we do have to be careful putting our own convictions and timing on other people. It's not your life. And I have to remind myself of that. Even raising my kids, they're not going to grow and mature at the same rates as other kids grow and mature, and that's okay. They're not going to grow and mature at the same rate that I did. They have a different life, even though they might have similar genes. I don't know who needed to hear that. Maybe you do. And maybe even to some extent, it's how we look at ourselves too. Are you being really hard on yourself and kicking yourself? It's interesting bringing this scriptural idea back. When love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. If you don't love yourself, or at least acknowledge the ways in which you love yourself, and where the healthy balance of that is, then how can you adequately love others? Now, this backfires a lot with my kids. I'll say, you need to treat your sibling the way you want to be treated. And you're like, I don't care if I got treated this way. I'm like, yes, you would. No, I wouldn't. Well, then you're really not thinking very highly of yourself. And sometimes I think if we have a poor self-image, then we're going to have a poor image of others. So there does need to be a sense of balance. There does need to be a sense of healthy biblical conviction, biblical-based conviction on whatever it might be. Whatever sin area you're wrestling with, whatever ethic area you're wrestling with. A lot of rabbit trails I think we could go down. I think I'm going to hold off for right now. If you've stuck with me, thank you. I'm going to leave the comments open on this video. Feel free to comment. Subscribe. If you like this, give me a thumbs up, and I'll continue posting Thoughtful Threads of Theology, Episode 2. Take care.